Framework. I am Al Schwartz. Joining once again is Chris Prentice to continue our roll through the Sopranos. We're up to the final-ish season 6A, I suppose it was called. I don't know. Do you think of the final two bits as being the same thing, or like a season 6, season 7?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird that they call it, season 6 whatever part 1 or A and season 6, part 2, cuz I mean they aired basically a year apart. I think if you're going to do the
Yeah.
whole we're splitting up the season, which I think is always kind of lame to begin with, but if they're going to do that, I mean, I feel like it should be at least like within the same 6 months of each other that they air, but whatever. It was HBO's move, and yeah.
Yeah, they're hardly unique in that. Like, there's been a whole lot of cable shows, prestige shows especially, that have split up their final seasons in a similar fashion. It's mainly just it's a contracting thing that if they
Yeah.
call it part of the same season, they don't have to renegotiate the actors or the, I guess,
Well,
other crew members' deals.
yeah, and it milks it out because
Yeah,
obviously everything is going to air over a longer period. I know they're doing that with Better Call Saul, and they've already done that
yeah.
with Ozark, where they just kind of put out like 6 episodes, and then it'll be a little while before we get the next. And I think it also
And they
doesn't
did it. They
hurt.
did it with Breaking Bad and Mad
Yeah,
Men and Battlestar Galactica off the top of my head.
and it doesn't hurt that
Game
it
of Thrones, even
also.
like last two seasons were kind of like both shortened from prior seasons. Although in that's one case where they just flat out called them season 7, season 8 instead of like I think milking it is definitely a little part of it, but I have to think it's the contract stuff that is the
But I
main
also
thing.
I think it doesn't hurt that it also gets them eligible for awards over the span of two more seasons. Because I mean that was certainly the case with The
Yeah.
Sopranos. It's one season, but it got them eligible for two different Emmy runs.
Yeah, but calling them 6 and 7 would also get you in two different Emmy runs. I don't know. Look, this is not the most important thing. We got
No,
bigger fish to fry.
no. At least it's 12 episodes. I mean, so that's it
Yeah, this is a full season.
lengthwise it is pretty much a full season.
So I had always remembered this season as sort of like, oh yeah, this is clearly the weakest season, and I think actually that there's a pattern that I've seen over all these shows that split things this way. That the first half of that last season tends to always be like the weakest part in my eyes, um, or not always, most of the time. Even like if they don't split it up exactly like that, the second to last season tends to be a kind of a dud. I think that was true of the Shield. I think the Americans saw some of
Yeah,
that too.
that's definitely the case with Justified. I remember that the second to last season was
Justified is another one.
was
Yeah,
really bad. Yeah, I think because you get. I mean, this is my own theory. You get to the point. I mean, these shows start. The people behind them, the creative forces, they have an idea of how to start them. They've got ideas for a few seasons, and then they keep getting renewed, and maybe they have an idea of how to end it, but what they're going to do exactly in the middle, it kind of gets muddied, and I think that's what typically happens.
yeah, and sometimes that's the middle part where things are at their muddiest. Is actually you get some of the best stuff of the series in there because like you also just have hit a stride there where the cast and the writers and the crew are all like just operating as a machine, well-oiled machine, and there's not a lot of pressure to like you're not feeling the pressure of the ending quite yet, so you can
Yeah.
kind of cook there. Sometimes they spin out and it you get a lot of dawdling, but sometimes you get just people operating at a very high level. I think for me, like the my theory for why that the part right before the end tends to be the draggiest is that it's right at the point where all right the end point has come into sight, and we
Yeah.
can now kind of feel the pressure of the end bearing down on us, and that's exciting. But also now we're at the part in the first half of that season where we have to like spin up our last set of subplots and do our last bits of table setting. But with the end in sight, you're feeling most impatient with that stuff.
Yeah, well, even with this first half of this season, basically, all these subplots they work themselves out, And what does it kind of build to? Well, it builds to Tony and Phil kind of reconciling and kind of being at peace with one another when we all kind of know that that's not really going to last. So it's like they're building up to an ending that we know really isn't going to mean very much, because it's not like in the final 9 episodes they're going to create some new nemesis for Tony to suddenly take on. So it's like, oh, that's great. They've made up, but you know that's only going to last like 2 or 3 episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I recall the reaction at the time. There being a lot of like people being like, "Well, this wasn't a bad episode," but there was also like some anxiety of like, "But with only X episodes left, we're doing this." We're like we're doing a street fair with Polly when we've only got 3 episodes left in the season or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and people just being like anxious about that. It's on a rewatch. You're not as concerned about that stuff.
No. No.
Um,
Uh, I will say it's kind of it's sort of frustrating, at least the beginning of this season, if you're binge watching the show, because let's say you're kind of going through the whole series in a you're kind of going one right after the other pretty quick. It's like you go from test stream towards the end of season 5. Then you get two great ones to end that season. Then I think you get a great episode to start this season, but then we're kind of right
yeah.
back into Tony Dreamland, and so it's kind of frustrating. Didn't matter at the time because there was so much time in between the episodes back then. But when you're binge watching, it's like, oh my god, now I'm back into the Dreamland.
I suppose that's true that the test stream and the coma stuff are way closer together on a rewatch than they were with
Yeah,
in real time. That's so. What I was struck by watching this is that the sixth season or 6A here, it's better than I remember it being. I think the reason why it stood out to me as the weakest of the bunch, aside from what the dynamic I mentioned a minute ago, is that it's got some of my least favorite stuff in the series in here, or like the weakest subplots or just stuff that I don't have as much patience for on revisit. But what I kind of forgotten, I guess, is just how dialed in everything is by this point. Like
oh yeah,
the baseline of the quote unquote nothing happens episodes are like so strong that the characters, that the ensemble's built out really nicely, and they've got a real beat on all these characters. The performers all know exactly what they're doing, and the writers, I think, have solved like the basic problem of writing The Sopranos, which, according to David Chase, I'm not making this up, but he said that the challenge of writing Sopranos is that uh, it's a show where 90% of the time every character is lying to themselves and to everybody else. Um,
yeah, yeah.
so that's
that
kind of hard to do.
yes, yeah, I can see
Uh,
where that would be a big issue.
but now they've got that totally sussed out at this point, like that it's and how to make that hysterical and like frame it so that the audience recognizes all the lies. Like it's amazing how many different like sets of lies Vito is telling and living
Oh yeah,
during that stretch, where like he's a sports writer and a spy, and trying to sneak back into the closet sort of with the mob
yeah,
guys, and but the fact that we can sort of clock all that in a single line, like they don't really slow down to explain to you all the lies he's telling Johnny Cakes about who he actually is or whatever, but you sort of see them piling up around the margins, and there's humor to be mined from that. Um, but yeah, I don't know. They've gotten that especially the lying to themselves part. That's kind of difficult, I think, to convey clearly, but they got to figure it out. I think like around the fourth season was where they figured that out. Because the best example of that I can think of is in the fourth season premiere when Tony is like showing Christopher the cop who supposedly killed his father, and
oh
Christopher's telling the story about he was bringing a crib into the house for me to sleep in, and Tony's like, shit, he's a bunch of TV trays actually, but it could have been whatever,
yeah,
and just points out like the lies that have built up around this to themselves, and that it's not really getting through to Christopher that that Tony's trying to puncture it there, but also Tony can't just let it slide. He kind of has
no, no, he has
to do that.
even though he's basically just wanting him to kill this cop for whatever reason we don't even know.
Yeah.
He's not going to let that go by.
yeah, and just by the sixth season, like they can throw that stuff off so like naturally. It seems like, and so it's really good stuff. That so the downside though, there's two gripes about this season. It would be the coma stuff and the veto stuff. So you know, you want to
Yeah.
start with the coma? I guess
Yeah,
work chronologically.
we'll start with Tacoma because I really think the very first episode of this season is great. I think it really starts out awesome. I love that they
One of
kind
the
of
best.
they give Eugene, who's a character we has kind of been around, but we've never really seen him do very much. I like that he it's almost like his episode, and basically you kind of get his whole domestic situation, and also the fact that he's left this big sum of money, and he's trying to get out of the mob. And what I love about that is that he's having this hard time trying to convince Tony to let him go and leave that way of life. And then we also learn that he's working with the FBI, and they don't want him. They're not going to let him go down to Florida as much as Tony would.
Yeah.
So I love that dynamic, and it's an unfortunate end for his character, but it's, I guess, the only feasible way that he saw to deal with it. But I think it's a great opening episode. And then yeah, once we get to the next couple, it's, I mean, it's all the dream stuff, and Tony being in the coma, and all that kind of stuff. It's like it's a great showcase for Gandolfini, and I think it's like, wow, look
Yep.
at him playing this other character, and oh, that's impressive. But beyond that, it just does very little for me.
Yeah, I just it worries me a bit how like all of those scenes there's just like a big flashing sign across the top of the screen that just says this is allegory in
Yeah,
like capital letters. And like I don't know. I don't need that for extended stretches of time. Like
yeah,
I'm already I'm in a fictional world, like with The Sopranos. I'm already like it's all allegory for the failure of the American experiment and so on and so forth. Like, but I don't need another layer in there. I mean, we talked about this with the test stream as well.
right.
Um,
Yeah, it just
but
gets to
you
be
know,
it's just it's too much, especially the join the club, the first episode. Not as
mhm,
bad in Mayhem, because they do incorporate more quote unquote real life. They have an actual subplot going on with Paulie and Vito, and it
mhm.
has the great opening sequence with Paulie facing off against those Colombians. And I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff in Mayhem. So you're not getting all coma as you were enjoying the club. But yeah, it's just kind of all the coma stuff is just it's just a little bit, it's just too much.
Well, I should say there's the real world stuff during that coma. Those episodes is great. That
Yeah.
you talk about a showcase for Gandolfini, but what a showcase for Edie Falco
Oh
too.
yeah,
During those scenes and the stuff I love seeing Silvio in charge briefly
that was
and how that
great.
doesn't really sit well with him and everybody is just on their worst shittiest behavior, at least like Vito and Bobby like won't leave Silvio alone when he's going into the ambulance
Yeah.
uh, and you know like that stuff the stuff there is really good and part of the reason why Mayhem I think you're right is better than Join the Club is because there's also just a little more bleed over between the real world stuff like edging into the corners of the coma, and just when Paulie's blathering at him, and
Yeah.
then it manifests as just the TV in the room next door. He's banging on the wall. Go, will you shut up in there?
Well, we also
Um,
get in Mayhem, we get the great meeting of the Cleaver investors scene,
oh God,
which
so good.
that's I mean, that scene on its own would be enough to salvage. You can give me as much coma stuff as you want if you can give me scenes like that. I just, oh my god, it's just such a hilarious moment right there.
Yeah, it's another example of how Sopranos can sort of like drop stuff on you out of nowhere, and stuff you would never like think beforehand. Like uh, going into that episode, told me that one of the scenes here would have Silvio like snapping
Yeah.
at Tim Daly about how Michael Myers is not a supernatural figure; he's an escaped mental patient, and that puts him in a different subgenre of horror movies. I'd be like, "What the fuck are you talking about? That's not Silvio's character at all." Except somehow in that scene, everybody is just in that mode, and it fits the character and those guys that they can do that somehow.
Yeah, my favorite bit. I mean, that's a great part with the Michael Myers discussion. But my favorite is little Carmine, kind of showing how successful he's been in the entertainment industry by hyping up the his success with the South Beach Strumpet series.
Yeah, yeah. Little Carmine.
I mean, I know we'll probably get more into him with an episode later on, but oh god, I just if I could go back in if we could go back in time and create a Better Call Saul type spinoff for this show, for me the choice would be Little Carmine easily. I could watch him all day, every day.
I think it's a 30-minute series.
Yeah, but
It's a little more
still,
comedic, but yeah, um, yeah. I mean, so the other thing that I think that why the coma stuff doesn't entirely work for me, besides my just being a luddite that doesn't appreciate the philosophical pretensions being on blast like that, um, is something I think relates to the Vito subplot too. You know that for and I think there's a reason why the veto stuff in New Hampshire is weaker that goes beyond just the latent homophobia of it all. Um, and part of it is that look, I just don't think that Joseph Ganascoli is up for the demands of that storyline or just that level of focus. It's a shame because like Chase had a really great track record throughout the series of elevating bit players to become like important parts of the ensemble, like going all the way back to the pilot where Adriana was just cast as a hostess, and Drea De Matteo got elevated to one of the series leads by the fifth season, and then you saw similar sort of trajectories with like characters like Bobby or Johnny Sack, Little Carmine as an example too of people that started out really as bit players that weren't necessarily going to appear in more than one episode, but they just gradually just sidled towards the center of the frame more. Gene Pontecorvo eventually gets his chance to shine here. You could even throw Silvio, I guess, in there. I think there
yeah.
was, especially in the pilot episode, you can see him doing a little bit of retconning in the first season about how actually maybe Silvio is part of Tony's crew because he's not presented that way in the pilot episode, and I think that's just that there was not a lot of confidence in little Stevie Van Zandt as an actor, so they
No.
kind of wanted to test him out for a while. But I just don't think Vito has the presence of a lot of those people. And
I'm not with you here. I think that yeah, there are maybe some missteps with the storyline, but I don't think it's because of Vito at all. I think he's great in a lot of this stuff that's going on in New Hampshire. I mean, my favorite bit being the sequence where he's supposed to be working at an
yep,
actual legit job, and how his inner monologue, and oh, don't look at your clock, don't look at your watch, savor it, think of those sandwiches Jim made. I mean, look at the direction of the sun. It's got to be 11:15. I mean, I really thought, to be honest, when they first introduced the fact that Vito was gay. So in the previous season, when we saw him with the security guard, and Finn saw him in the parking lot at the end of the season 5, I kind of figured that was just going to be one of those things that they introduce and they really never go back to. And it's just going to be one of those things that people are like, oh, remember he was in the car with the security guard. Remember, I wonder if that's ever going to come up.
yeah,
I really didn't think
it'd
that
be a
they would.
Russian in the woods.
Exactly. I thought it would be something like that, and that they wouldn't really explore it beyond that. So when they decided that they were going to, yeah, it's not 100% successful, but I almost feel like it's about as good as we could have expected with this storyline. I don't think it's as well, I don't think it's as bad as you think it is, and I know a lot of people kind of look at these episodes and when he's in New Hampshire as kind of like one of the weaker parts of the series, and yeah, maybe compared to everything else that could be true, but I don't have as big an issue with it as most people. I think there's a lot of good scenes, and I thought Ganascoli, I thought he did well. I thought he did a nice job
Well,
with what he had to work with.
I don't think it's terrible.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty fine, and you're right, especially that morning work
Oh
sequence
God, it's
is
great.
just it's incredible. It stayed with me for so long. It's the most incredible portrait of laziness that captured in like 2 minutes. It's just so biting. Like, oh my god. But and that there is a lot of good stuff in there. I think the problem there, why at least for me, why it still drags even on rewatches, is just it goes on for too long. It's stretched out over like 4 or 5 episodes,
Yeah,
which
it's a
doesn't
while.
sound like a ton uh, for a lot of shows that will drag subplots on for seasons at a time. But really, the way The Sopranos operates, like there's stuff that you think of as plot lines that span the course of the series, like say Christopher doing Hollywood stuff. That probably only the Christopher Hollywood episodes probably amounts to 4 or 5, episodes over the
Yeah.
course of 7 seasons. Whereas Vito spends 4 or 5 episodes in New Hampshire. And on top of that, I think it's just that it isolates him so much uh, that that's a long time to spend. This parents would sometimes like have characters like go do something kind of on their own, but usually that was over in the span of an episode
Yeah,
where,
not
Carmela's going
for
to go to
right,
Paris. Yeah.
not
Or,
protracted
or,
episodes.
right. Right. Christopher goes to Hollywood and relapses and meets Ben Kingsley and punches out Lauren Bacall all in the course of one episode.
Right.
Um, and we're back. So for that, to do 4 episodes in a row there, where there are none of the rest of the ensemble for him to interact with, that's a lot to put on the actor. It's also just, it means that those scenes drag for me. And to tie it back to the coma stuff, that's also part of my issue with the coma stuff, is that as you know, Gandolfini is light years better than Ganascoli,
Yeah.
I think, in holding the screen on his own. But it's these extended stretches where he doesn't get to interact with the rest of the ensemble, and that's what I'm here for. I love the ensemble.
Right, and another issue that I have, if we're going to go real quick back to the coma stuff, is that having Uncle Junior, shoot Tony. It was, even though yeah he does show up here and there, it was kind of like the end of Uncle Junior in a way.
Yeah,
I mean, we just don't, and he's one of my favorites on the show. So it's like after that he becomes a pretty, his role is reduced greatly. I mean, he does get a great episode in the last batch, but for the most part, he's kind of done. And so that's another issue that I have with with that storyline, because anything that takes Uncle Junior away from me is going to be a big problem for me.
I certainly understand that, but I do, pulling back, looking at it all, I respect the like how they allowed that slow, sad deterioration to spool out for him. That
Yeah,
they
they did do
didn't
that.
give they didn't give the character like a big last hurrah just out of affection for the actor or whatever. And it is something where Junior is a fairly hateful character a lot of the time, and was a full blown antagonist to Tony in the first season when we met
Sure.
everybody.
Yeah.
But his the way he deteriorates, sort of similar with Johnny Sack in that final season too. It's just a sort of sad, ignominious end for these gangsters that don't even get the dignity of a bullet to the head.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. So I mean, so yeah, like you said, they do a good job gradually showing Uncle Junior kind of succumbing to old age. Basically, you can call it dementia, call it old age,
Yeah,
whatever you want. But it just made me sad that we weren't going to get as much of him going forward. So that's another problem that I had. But um, just kind of going back also to the Vito storyline, even though yeah he's yeah as you say it's true, he's in New Hampshire for God a long long time, but I love how he comes back to Jersey and the way that he ends up coming back, and they do a great thing where there's the scene where we don't even know really who this gangster is, but he runs into the one gangster in the supermarket who he ends up lending the money to, and it's just such a great little bit of this character that we really know nothing about, and just to me it's a hilarious gag of after Vito's been offed
Mhm.
by Phil and his crew, and just the hilarious moment where they mention, oh, I wish I had borrowed money from him, and he obviously had. I don't know, I always really love that bit
Yeah,
because it just comes out of nowhere.
yeah, and that's the type of stuff that they're very good at tossing off this
Yeah,
far into the run. That as much as we're starting to, you see certain storylines or beats recycled over time. They're also just they're getting so good at do it at the basics.
yeah.
I mean, that's I don't have a bunch more on Vito. I guess I don't know. It is. I think. Well, I think it's ironic that Vito is a total piece of shit. Uh,
Yeah, oh
he
yeah.
probably deserves to be murdered as much as anybody on the show
Yeah.
ever has. But of course, he isn't going to get killed for being a murderer himself, or
No.
just a lying, thieving piece of shit who was trying to chisel money out of Carmela while Tony was dying. Uh, but it's for this sex stuff that doesn't harm anybody. you
Well, and then
Arguably his wife, I guess.
it's also it's kind of it's again, this is sort of a hallmark of the series in general, is that you have these episodes in New Hampshire where you're kind of like, oh, I kind of like Vito. He's away from the gangland, and he's just kind of trying to live his life, and you're sympathizing with him. He has the bit we mentioned where he's trying to work a legit job for one day, and so we kind of feel on good terms with him. But then there's the scene where he runs into the guy's car, out in the middle of nowhere, and ends up just shooting the citizen in the back of the head, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, he's not a very good person.
No. Well, here's the other thing, though, and maybe this also plays into why I'm not that into the New Hampshire stuff. Is I don't find the relationship with Johnny Cakes very convincing. It's partly because Vito, even in his nicer guys out there, doesn't seem like that good of a guy to me, or like that. He doesn't seem that smart or that funny, or I don't really understand what attracts Johnny Cage takes to him. I mean, there's no accounting for taste, I guess, physically, but
Yeah,
I just he seems to be a pretty sharp guy with a real moral compass and everything. And how are you not picking up that whatever this guy is,
the heart
he's
wants what the heart wants. What are you gonna do?
I
That's
guess I don't know. If it's one of the other gangsters, I think that they tend to have a more innate charm that I just never got from Vito. Um, just he's not as funny as as a lot of these guys, as Christopher Bully.
I don't know, man. He's had some pretty funny moments over the show's run. I mean, yeah, I mean you can't compare him to Paulie or Christopher, but I don't know. I guess I feel bad for him. I feel bad for the actor overall because he's been kind of exiled from any post Soprano get-togethers and anything having to do with Sopranos. I mean, I guess he kind of brought it on himself, because for a few reasons. One of which was after Gandolfini died, he did a bunch of interviews and kind of portrayed himself as kind of being a real close friend of Gandolfini, but nobody else really seemed to believe that. And I've heard a lot of different stories about how everyone just can't stand him and wants nothing to do with him. And so I don't know. I feel it's probably all deserved, but I just have kind of a soft spot in my heart for him.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that about Gannon Scully, that he's not well liked by the rest of the cast. But I don't know. I mean, that's not my business. I guess it's whatever.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm just talking about when I'm revisiting these episodes. Those are the ones where I'm like, oh, okay, this is another one with 20 minutes of New Hampshire stuff. Um,
I don't know. I think they
but
did
everything else around
about
that,
as
some of
bad.
those New Hampshire episodes, the stuff back in Jersey is great.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
well, yeah,
where AJ is trying to kill Junior, and I mean, even just like I love the therapy session of Tony going to Melfi after they find out about Vito and how it sort of cycles through all the possible objections to like, oh, it's so disgusting, and like three excuses later, it's like, oh yeah, don't forget I'm a strict Catholic. I
right.
believe this, like
Well,
he forgot for a minute, but like, oh yeah, that's one of them, and then pretty quickly gets to the point of like, I don't know, I guess I don't really give a fuck. Just
Well, I like the discussion he has with Melfi, where Melfi kind of asks, "Yeah, but don't don't a lot of you guys spend years and years in prison, and isn't this something
yeah.
that happens in prison?" And Tony's just, "Well, you get a pass for that."
Yeah, it's a great little performance. There's just a great little pause from him there. Like, yeah, um, and that's where hypocrisy again. They're really good at just rendering
Oh
that.
yeah, they'll
You know,
justify
uh,
whatever. It is a great scene where the mobsters kind of are, they first sort of learn about, Vito possibly being gay, and where they bring Finn into the back of the sausage store to kind of question him, because he obviously has a story to tell about Vito. And I don't know, I love that he just kind of gets grilled by by these mobsters, and he's, trying to basically say what he saw, but he doesn't want anyone getting killed over it, and he's trying to be as careful as he can. And then, finally Tony basically just says, "Well, thank you very much. Why don't you just go out and go have make you a sandwich, any kind you like."
I do. That the actor who plays Finn, I don't give him a ton of plaudits really, except the way he squirms in that
Oh, he's
scene
a good
is really
squirmer.
great.
He's a great
Yeah,
squirmer.
and I love how that is sort of going one way, and like everybody's just kind of grumbling or whatever, and it's not until he clarifies like that Vito was catching,
The
not pitching in Paulie's terms, that
Yes,
everybody like it takes a
that's
hard turn after that.
oh
Like
yeah,
the guys had sort of resigned. Like I guess it's part of that prison thing of like, yeah, well, if you do what you do and blah blah blah. But as long as it's going one way, and then
right.
but if they find out it's the other way, it's like, all right, forget about it all. It's
Yeah, that's the final straw for all of them.
yeah. It's weird. I guess it's really consistent with going back to like Boca and how their standards
Oh,
on,
of
are
course.
that you're not allowed to give oral sex to anybody. I guess even to women. Just you
Though, of
gotta leave.
course, that was one of
You get laid as much as you want, but you better leave that lover unsatisfied. God damn it.
right, but then now that was on the fatal last boat ride for Big Pussy. That was, one of the things that he expressed he enjoyed doing, um right slightly before he ends up getting killed. They didn't seem to have a
Yeah,
problem with it then, but
but then Tony also comes back in with that with like, did she even exist?
well,
Like one of the
yeah,
other examples of just
yeah,
of the everybody's lying to everybody, and even this thing, which is not an important lie, like the details of that, but it's just you know how you can't trust anybody in this world. The
yeah.
the coma stuff underlines that as well. With Vito and Polly. Um, so I but again, we're talking a lot about the negatives there, the things we didn't like there. But I'm saying I've forgotten how good everything else was, and particularly I think the two for of episodes where Tony's like recovering uh, after he comes out of the coma, the fleshy
Yeah.
part of the thigh and
Oh yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. Sacrimony request. Those are two really good episodes.
Yeah. Well, fleshy part of the thigh has my absolute favorite non sequitur joke in all of the series, when they're performing the surgery on Tony, and the
Oh yeah,
doctor just out of the blue is like, "Oh my god!" And they're like, "What?" "I think I found Jimmy Hoffa." Is That's my favorite non sequitur joke that the series ever did. I love
it is like
that.
a Family Guy cutaway.
Oh, it's so great.
like
It's just out of nowhere, and oh my god, that is such a great moment. But that's a great episode. You get You get, hey, who doesn't like to see Hal Holbrook? I mean, come on, that's quality right there.
He is
Also,
so great.
yeah, he's great, and I mean, we get the subplot with a noted hip hop star Treach of Naughty
Hmm.
by Nature,
Naughty by nature.
trying if I'll tell you, if I have to name my favorite lyric in all of Naughty by Nature songs, I'm gonna go with, this is just my choice, but my favorite lyric would have to be, "I'm naughty by nature, not 'cause I hate you." That's always been my
I believe
favorite
the
one.
full lyric is I did your partner because she's hot as a baker, because I'm naughty by nature,
Wow.
not because
Okay,
I
you're
hate you.
you're even well beyond me with the naughty by nature knowledge. I'm impressed,
I
I
am a
gotta say.
scholar
Yes. No,
of such things.
I bow to you on all things Treach. But yeah,
All right. Well,
I liked that bit with him and Bobby and the whole, hey, I can shoot you and get raise your credibility within the rap scene. And yeah, that's just a good episode. I mean, it's after having to go through all of the stuff with Tony in the coma, I think that was a
mm,
solid rebound from those.
yeah, there's another great little tiny bit in that episode that just tickles me to death. Tony's reading a book in his recovery room and telling Christopher about how if the Empire State Building represented all of time, then like the time humans are on the Earth would be a postage stamp at the very top. Do you realize how insignificant that makes us? And there's just for some reason the 1 second of pause that Michael Imperioli gives, and Christopher just looks at him and kind of squints, and then just goes, "I don't feel that way." And it's it's sort of like there is a philosophical underpinning to there. Tony's struggling with eternity and insignificance, and Chris is sort of representing a more immediate philosophical whatever. But just the way
Yeah.
he plays it off is just Chris is being a little too dim, even when like confronted directly with it. It's just like, nah,
I don't feel that way.
I'm way more important than that.
I'm gonna make Cleaver, for God's sakes.
Exactly. I'm an auteur.
Yeah.
Uh, so all right, that's if I was going to highlight an episode, I guess it would be the fleshy part of the thigh. That would be my. I think that's a really underrated one.
Oh, it's
Although
good.
the Johnny Sack wedding episode is also great.
That's that. Yeah. Anytime you get the ones that it's the big event where like the whole cast is involved, I always love those. And so, yeah, the wedding episode gets that done. And
Mhm.
I love when,
Ensembles. That's what I was talking
yeah.
about.
Oh yeah, I mean that's great when you can see everybody kind of riffing off of each other. And
Mm.
I like when they're kind of discussing the possibility of killing off the Rusty character, the who
Yeah,
played by Frankie Valli, and that whole kind of moment where they're sitting around the older people who have no idea what they're talking about, and that's a great moment. So yeah,
that is
two,
fun stuff,
yeah, two very good back to back episodes there. I definitely agree.
and some good stuff of Christopher being an idiot in that episode too.
Oh yeah,
You know,
yeah.
the cough medicine thing, and then confusing the whole like favor asking stuff from Godfather. But you should just ask him not to have you do this. Like you found a loophole.
And I
But
think it's
uh,
again a credit to the series that even though Johnny Sack has kind of been a huge dirtbag through pretty much almost the entirety of the series, when he's kind of taken off in cuffs at the end of the wedding, I feel bad for him, man. It's like, God, I feel
oh yeah,
feel terrible for him.
yeah. When he's sitting in his jail cell and afterwards and just staring at the wall,
Oh yeah.
there's somewhere in like the commentary or whatever, Vincent Curatilis and Steve Buscemi directed that episode
Hmm.
and told him that like don't look mad, don't look frustrated. It's just nothing. Everything's over. There isn't even
Hmm.
you're not even mad or sad anymore. And Vincent Curatilis said it was the best bit of direction he'd ever gotten.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean
So
that's that
hats off to
moment.
Buscemi.
Right. Well, I mean that day pretty much is like the last bit of happiness that he really experiences, and pretty much anytime we see him after that, it's not for anything good, at least for in his eyes, at least.
Well, and I do love the what that sort of seeds in for the finale too. Of that, Phil, I think it's sort of is sincerely kind of disgusted when he sees Johnny Sack cry, but he's also just sort of seizing on it to
Oh yeah.
advance his own position
Oh,
and
of
saying, "Oh,
course.
this what a sign of weakness." And then when Tony goes to him in the hospital in the finale and says, it's like wish him like stop crying, we're gonna get through this. And I think that if Phil had held out there and just not let any tears drop, and Tony hadn't seen it, and I think it feels like that gives Tony something to hold over him there, even though he's not explicitly threatening him with it. It's
Sure.
still kind of there, and I think it's part of what backfoots Phil into not starting the war there where he was about to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, it's kind of it's one of those moments that we know it's not going to last for very long, because again we now know that the show is going to be heading into its last batch of episodes, and who is Tony going to end up feuding with. So it's a little hollow, but I mean it is still a nice scene between the two characters.
You say that, except that this is like the third season in a row that has sort of ended with teasing a war with like a full blown war with the New York mob, and then backed. They find a way to back down from it. Um, so I think when it was first on, I kind of thought, okay, yeah, you're right. They do have to have kind of a big final conflict. But I was like, but this is Sopranos, man. Maybe they don't. You know, they didn't have to shoot the main character in the opening episode and have him, in coma land for a couple episodes. They didn't have to kill Ralphie and
Well,
eight
I think
episodes into a 13 episode season like that. They do weird stuff in this show.
right, but it's like I think if you look at the second to last episode, Cold Stones, there's
Mhm.
the great and one of my favorite kill scenes in the show is Fat Dom being killed by
Yeah, that's true.
Silvio and Carlo, and I feel like that's kind of a moment where you're like, all right, it's on now. Now they've killed a made guy from New York, and now we're really going to get into the nitty gritty. I mean, I love that sequence. It's also like the even though Carlo has kind of been a character who's been around for a few seasons, he hadn't really done anything. So I think it was great that he kind of got kind of his hands dirty, and so I really liked. I love that sequence. And then I love when Tony comes to the comes by a little bit later, and Silvio's, oh, you don't want to walk in here, you don't want to look at any of this, I'm just telling you. And Tony Tony just takes a look, turns around, throws his hands up, doesn't say a word. It's such great acting by Gandolfini, because there's
It
just
is.
not a word, and he just storms out of the place. So I love that sequence. So I feel like that kind of was a moment where I'm like, all right, now it's really going to be on. And then an episode later, it's kind of this truce, and I mean it's all fine because it's The Sopranos, it's all great, but it was just a little strange to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much easier in hindsight to be like, well, we do know that we're going to get a full blown war in the final batch of episodes. It's
Yeah,
going to be pretty
yeah.
great. So you're not feeling anxious or impatient about like when are they going to get to the fireworks factory this time around. But I don't know. Let's segue into who's the worst person in the world in this season, because this is the hardest one for me so far. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm gonna take kind of the easy way and just go with Phil. Um,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's not the not maybe not the sexiest choice, but I feel like we were introduced to him kind of in season 5, and that was great, but I think this is where we really kind of see how evil he is, and he's perhaps more evil in the last batch of episodes, but I just can't really think of anyone who's worse than him in this particular half of the season.
yeah, I think that's where I land too. Although I think you know the reason okay, so they're so good, like I said at this point, at showing how everybody in this world is kind of a conniving piece of shit. Uh, but also everybody, it seems like everybody gets like some of their best moments or most sympathetic moments in this season too. So like, I mean, Tony is one of the worst people in the world by this point, in this world.
Yeah.
But also he's in his like sort of kinder, gentler form once he gets out of the hospital. Uh, or at least he's making an effort to be kinder and gentler, unless you're that poor dumb muscle boy that he
Oh yeah,
abuses.
yeah. The imitation Vin Diesel.
Yeah. um, so I don't know. Like he's trying to turn over a new leaf. So maybe that like it's not the worst he's in the show, but he's maybe one of the worst. Like I said, Vito's an incredible piece of shit for a lot of this season, except that we're sort of sympathetic to him because he's also being persecuted for this thing that he does not deserve it for. He deserves it for all these other reasons.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. No,
and
I can't go
Polly's
with
pretty
Vito.
terrible.
Yeah, it's like Paulie's kind of in the
But
running every year, but it's like
mhm,
he's too likable to really say that he's the
right,
worst person. It's just the way it goes.
yeah, and AJ is really shitty for a lot of this season, and I would almost give it to him, except that the finale is him at like the high point of him like developing into a real person before he's going to regress pretty hard
Yeah.
going forward.
Well, I think
Um,
my favorite AJ scene in this season is where basically Tony tells him he got him the job in the construction site, and you're going to go there
yeah.
at 7 in the morning, and AJ is giving him every excuse. Oh, it's too cold. It's blah 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 blah, and then Tony just takes the helmet and just smashes the windshield of AJ's truck, and then just kind of looks at AJ and says, "Don't put me to the test."
Mhm. Yeah, and that it turns out that's actually a really good thing for AJ.
For a little while. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah, it works out for a little while. These people,
Hmm.
again, they don't really have the work ethic to do a real job. I mean, none of
No,
them do.
no.
And you know, Tony, for as disgusted as he is by how lazy AJ is, also has never instilled that work ethic in him. And it's a little too little, too late at this point. Um, so there's one last thing I wanted to go over here that I was thinking about here, and it sort of relates to the coma stuff and like why are we spending that much time there? And I think it's the chase at this point is getting a little bored with the gangster stuff and with he's a curmudgeon of a guy that never really liked working in TV, and a lot of what
Oh,
the
sure.
Sopranos is about, and what made it so interesting is the way he's sort of bucking against convention and working against it, and he's if the audience is just happy and satisfied, he's bored, so he's never going to do that. But so like what's he like digging into? What does he think is still worth like exploring at this point in the run? And it's these sort of questions of identity that are at the center of that coma stuff. And I started thinking about this in relation to just the TV antiheroes generally, and like so the prototype typical TV antihero is a middle-aged white guy who's got a criminal secret life, right?
Sure.
You agree with that?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. No, wholeheartedly.
But I was thinking about how and the crime stuff seems so like essential to that. Except I was thinking about how if I'm doing the great TV antiheroes with like Tony and Walter White and so forth, like Don Draper is up there,
Yeah.
despite the fact that he does not. I guess there's some fraud involved in his double life, but it's not
Yeah, not
the way of Walter White or Tony
no.
Soprano. Yeah,
It's not certainly not any kind of a crime that's going to like really hurt anybody.
yeah, but he is living in fear of being exposed nonetheless.
Oh, sure.
Um, and then I look at somebody else like Jax Teller from Sons of Anarchy, which is a framework punching bag that we trot out quite a bit out here. But like, why is he not doesn't feel like of the same lineage? And I think it's the difference being that the crime is not as important to what makes these characters compelling as the double life. Um,
Yeah.
And Jax Teller is not pretending to be anything but a gang leader, you know.
He
So
has no double life. He's Jax Teller.
right, as opposed to Dexter or Don Draper, you know, whatever that are, and I think that's what makes them fundamentally compelling and relatable. Even as you know, The Sopranos is incredibly specific about the milieu that it's operating in, and like the character of Tony is very idiosyncratic. But he also comes off as this weirdly like American everyman type. You know, he is
Oh yeah.
stands in for something there, and why he's relatable to anybody. You know, even women, as much as unfriendly as the show can be to women. Uh, that you know, I think everybody can relate to that. We all have a sense that we don't get to be our full selves and everywhere. We have to be a different version of ourselves at work and with our parents and with our spouses and with our friends or whatever. And what The Sopranos, even as like the first of these shows, like did better than any of them is that Tony's living like way more than a double life. He's living like a sextuple life. You know that
Oh, for sure.
he's he's not just like a gangster and a family man, but he's also like a husband to Carmela at the same time that he's a boyfriend to his
To
various gumas
right. Yeah, and
and
even
how like
a patient to
even
Melfi. I mean,
yeah, and he's showing more sides. He's like he can be honest with her in a way he can't be with any of the other people, but it's
oh
still
yeah.
not fully honest.
No.
And he can be honest with Carmel in a way that he can't with a lot of other people, but it's still not fully honest. And like you know, even like Carmel and the Gumars know about each other, but he still has to like work around the specifics and like downplay it. That you know, presented to Carmela like that. Oh, there's no like emotional component to any of this. That it's just I'm just banging the strippers at the bang. You don't need to worry about anything. But
Yeah.
really, he's like carrying on relationships for years at a time with like you know their Russian girl and whatever. And with the girlfriends, he is sort of like not necessarily tell them this maybe, but let them believe that his marriage is worse than it is, and he kind of hates his wife, and that they're the real one.
Well, you know, when you kind of bring up that you know, there's the episode this season with Juliana Margulies, and it's kind of
Yeah,
interesting how that's there's an instance where you know, she's game to basically have this affair, but you know, he really won't. He won't go through with it, and how that kind of gets him angry and makes him even angrier at Carmela for the fact that he's not able to go through with it. So yeah, it's like it's all these different lies and this way of thinking that he's always had is all kind of turned. It sort of flips upside down, and that's in that storyline at least.
yeah, and it ties into the just the lying to everybody and yourselves and everything that all the different layers of lies that Tony juggles that we now just sort of we understand them without having to have them really explained to us. You know, like even he's a dad to his kids, but
Hmm.
yeah, they know about his quote unquote secret life, but he still has to like hide all the
Sure.
particulars of that from them.
Yeah.
And you know, he's especially the later seasons too. They've gotten really good at also portraying how he's like still has a desire to just kind of like be one of the guys at work, but he's also a boss, and being the
Yeah.
guy's boss fundamentally changes his relationship to everybody. With possible exception of Silvio. I mean, even that it does, but he's I think the one who
Well,
he has the least clashes with
he seems to have
as an
more.
underling.
He seems to have more contempt as now in these episodes for like obviously Christopher and Polly,
Oh yeah,
and you know the people that he just kind of now just sees as total fuck ups. He just
yeah,
he just doesn't have the time for them anymore.
yeah. They're just pains in his balls increasingly. I mean,
Yeah,
Christopher. That's we'll talk about that more in the next season.
sure, sure. And even with Paulie
Yeah,
in the last batch of episodes, they have a kind of a great episode together.
yeah, yeah.
But it just seems like this is kind of the point in the series where that's becoming more evident, where he just has zero fucks to give for these guys.
That's right. And even the stuff with New York, I guess, plays into that. That in this season especially and last season too, but how Tony can be a dictator within his own crew but he's also a vassal to the New York mob, where he
Oh
is
yeah.
like, can't really. He's a boss, but boss of Jersey, and all of that. Just it's a more elaborate set of contradictions than like you have Vic Mackey, who's a bad cop pretending to be a good cop, or even like Walter White, who's just he's Scarface, he's pretending to be Mr. Chips still.
Yes.
Um, that it's every angle is fraught with these contradictions and lies, and you're like, oh yeah, no wonder he has to go to therapy to try and resolve
Oh,
all of it.
for sure. That's the only place that he can be himself, and not maybe not fully, but more so than with his family or with his mob crew.
Yeah.
So I feel like I feel like we have to tackle one of the episodes here because I think we've kind of talked about it a little bit in earlier installments, but we have to kind of get into luxury lounge. I feel like
All right.
I mean, I take it that it's one that you're not a fan of.
I, as I've said, when they go deep into the Christopher Hollywood stuff, it gets uh, a little too cute for my taste. I prefer to live in the here and now with The Sopranos, and not in the dream world or in the hinterland world of. Is this a meta story where it takes place in the real world or whatever? Like,
But I mean, come on, you don't enjoy seeing Christopher and Little Carmine trying to convince Ben Kingsley to star in Cleaver? Come on.
oh, I enjoy those scenes greatly as comedy. I just overall, I also very much enjoy having the fourth wall intact.
I love that episode. There's so many great moments. I mean, I love when when Lauren Bacall when they first meet her and she's talking to Ben Kingsley and they introduce her to Christopher and Little Carmine and then she leaves. Little Carmine just says, "Enjoy your success."
It's a great little Carmine episode. I mean,
Oh,
they
that's I
always
mean,
are.
look, to me that episode we get an A storyline that involves Little Carmine and we get a B storyline that's all Artie. So I to me
Yeah, of course,
that's
that's
like,
your favorite.
well, it's a
Now that you
perfect
put that lay that out.
it's a perfect recipe. I mean, my God. I mean, that's everything with Artie there. I mean, that whole staff meeting with everyone at the restaurant is, I mean, that is such a killer scene. And I just that episode,
Yeah,
I love it. It's just got everything I want.
the guy just exploding about stealing the coats from the coat room.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the kind of humor that I love this Brandon's getting. That and maybe one of my favorite lines of the entire series. You might be able to guess is in this episode.
Is it one of Artie's lines? Because
Yes.
is it you pay me back with nonstop ass rape?
No.
No.
It's we lead the world in computerized data collection.
Oh yes, yes, yes. Oh yeah, that's. I'm telling
It
you,
just kills me.
he is a tour de force in this episode. So I just I know it's kind of an indulgent one with all the Hollywood stuff, but man, you give me this much Artie and this much Little Carmine in one episode, there's no way I can't love it.
And I do like at the very end of the episode, I like how they sort of tie it back into the Jersey mob stuff, almost like repairing the fourth wall a little bit to like, okay, so why did we have this detour out to LA? Is that it's creating a conflict now at home where Tony's saying like, I got to think this thing with Benny and Artie might not have gotten as out of control as it did if you were here
Right?
minding your crew,
Yeah,
because Benny's one of Chris's underlings,
yeah.
uh, and that feeds into the Tony Christopher conflict going forward. Um,
See, it
it's
all ties together.
that's something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
come on.
it's not a bad episode. It's just that none of the Hollywood ones are ever going to be my absolute favorites. I like Jersey. I like the.
No, I know. I hear you. I just when when you've got little Carmine trying to pitch to Ben Kingsley, and he says, "We want to surmise your interest, then tailor the part to your specificities."
Oh, what are the other bits? Going back to that Cleaver pitch in Mayhem.
Oh yeah.
Although like JT Dolan is starting the pitch, and Christopher just like is agitated and just blurts out like, "It's about a wise guy with a big mouth and bigger dreams."
Yeah.
It's such a lame log line like pitch, but also like when you hear the Lever pitch, like does not seem to apply whatsoever. It's more like that is a vestigial thing of like eight
Well,
drafts ago when Christopher started this as more of a memoir of it, where he was the main character before it became a horror thing. That's why we thought of it. And he hasn't quite let it go yet.
yeah. Well, then there's another bit with in Luxury Lounge where Christopher's trying to kind of hype up because Ben Kingsley's never heard of JT Dolan, has no idea about
Mm.
who he is, and Christopher's he's worked on several shows, Nash Bridges,
Nash Bridges.
Hoopa Man, which so that's like a short-lived John Ritter show in the '80s where he was a cop. It was Hooperman. It's like I almost wonder if like that's just I don't even know, but I wonder if that's like just some in joke with the writers. Did one of the writers work on that, and that's why they decided to throw it in there because it's just such a show that is like such a nothing show, but it's just I don't know hilarious that the way he pronounces it is Hoopa Man.
That's before he says Law and Order the SUV.
Yes, yeah, that also.
I would guess if one of the writers, Terrence Winter, or one of the writers, didn't work on Hooperman, they got rejected from
Maybe it's got to be something.
applying
It's like
for it.
why would they have had this obscure, Stephen Bochco produced John Ritter? It's not. It was like not even really a cop drama. It was a weird show. It was like a cop comedy drama. It was an odd show, but it was just funny that they kind of throw that one in there.
Yep. So I think that's it. This is I think probably the worst season of Sopranos, and also still one of the best seasons of
Yeah,
TV
exactly. I
like
mean, you
ever
can
made. It's a
right. It's like even when
uh,
it's. I mean, come on. Even when it's not the best compared to season 5 or season 2. I mean, what other season do we get Tony and Chris versus the Vipers? None. This is it right here.
that's right.
We're with the Vipers.
Or Bobby versus a Carney.
Exactly. Yeah. Come on. I mean, there's too much great stuff to not still count it as one of TV's best.
Yeah. But so from here we go into 6B or season 7, however you want to do it, that last stretch, and
Oh yeah.
man,
Yeah.
it's pretty much just wall to wall
Oh, I know.
the best of the best. Looking forward to that one, man.
Oh yeah. They're not screwing around with those ones.
Yeah. All right. Well, then I'll see you in a couple weeks. We'll go over that.
That sounds good. I can't wait.